Hey, welcome back. Pull up a chair. Turn off a light or two. You're in the right place. This channel is dedicated to one thing: stories that feel too real to be fiction and too strange to be anything else. We don't do jump scare compilations here. We don't do screaming at haunted houses content. What we do is sit down together, quietly, and we listen. Today we're doing something a little different. Something I've been putting together for a while now. A full series. 6 stories, back to back, all of them connected by a single thread. The people who keep our cemeteries. Groundskeepers, maintenance workers, night watchmen, people who show up at dawn with mowers and rakes and mud on their boots, who spend their days among the dead and rarely talk about what they see. Because here's the thing, and I mean this, nobody pays less attention to cemetery workers than the rest of us. We walk past them. We don't meet their eyes. We're focused on the graves, on our grief, on our flowers, and our prayers. But they see everything. This series is called Cemetery Caretakers. 6 stories, 6 real locations, 6 accounts that were shared in places you probably haven't looked. Private forums, deleted posts, handwritten notes found in tool sheds. I've tracked them down, stitched them together, and I'm going to read them to you exactly as they were told. A word before we start. Some of these stories don't end the way you'd hope. Some of them don't end at all, really. That's not me being dramatic. That's just how they were found. If this sounds like your kind of thing, and if you're still watching, I think it is. Hit that like button for me right now, and subscribe if you haven't already. Genuinely helps, and there's a lot more where this is coming from. All right, let's go. Story 1, the double plot. There's a practice in cemetery management called pre-need sales. It means selling burial plots to people who are still alive, people who want to plan ahead. Spare their families the paperwork. Pick a nice spot near the oak tree or the stone wall before someone else takes it. It's practical. It's common. Most cemeteries do it. At Hargrove Memorial Cemetery in rural Shelby County, Kentucky, pre-need sales accounted for roughly 60% of the cemetery's annual revenue. Families would come out on weekday afternoons, walk the grounds with the manager, pick their spots. Couples almost always chose double plots to spaces side by side so they could rest together when the time came. The trouble at Hargrove Memorial, and I want to be careful about how I say this, is that some of those double plots were already occupied, both of them, before any licensed burial had ever taken place there. This account was posted in 2019 to a private Facebook group called the Groundskeepers Network, closed community for cemetery maintenance professionals. The post was written by a member using the name silentgrounds_Dale, who listed his employer as Hargrove Memorial and his role as head groundskeeper. His account received over 200 comments before the group administrator quietly removed it. Dale's Facebook profile was deleted 3 weeks later. Someone saved the text before it disappeared, and it eventually made its way to a horror community Discord, where I found it last spring. This is what Dale wrote. I'm paraphrasing the framing, but the events are his words. Dale Pruitt had worked at Hargrove Memorial for 11 years before any of this started. He was the kind of worker you'd call indispensable, not flashy, not management material, just deeply, quietly competent. He knew every section of the grounds, every drainage problem, every tree whose roots were threatening to heave up the walkways. He knew which graves got morning sun and which got afternoon shade. He knew the cemetery the way you know your own home in the dark. He noticed the first anomaly in the spring of 2017. During a routine pre-burial site inspection in Section D, which was where Hargrove kept most of its pre-sold double plots, a family named Calloway had purchased a double plot D112 and D113 3 years prior. Neither space had been used. Neither should have shown any sign of disturbance. But when Dale walked the site that morning to mark it for an adjacent burial, he found that D112, the left-hand plot, had settled. Significantly, 3 to 4 inches of compaction in a plot that had never been interred. He logged it as a drainage issue. The Kentucky clay was unpredictable, especially after a wet winter. Soil settled. Happened. He filed a maintenance report and moved on. The second anomaly came 6 weeks later, in Section B. Different plot, different family. A couple named the Hennings, who'd purchased spaces B44 and B45 back in 2014. Again, neither occupied. Again, the left-hand plot had settled, this time by 5 inches. And this time, when Dale pushed his soil probe into the ground to check the subsurface compaction, it hit resistance at about 3.5 feet down. It's not rock, not tree root, something that gave slightly, then held firm. He told himself it was debris. Old construction material sometimes ended up in fill soil during the original cemetery grading. He flagged the plot for review and moved on. The third time was in Section F, and this time he didn't move on. The Whitfield double plot F209 and F210 had been sold to an elderly couple who still came by every few months to check on their spot, which Dale had always found quietly moving. They wanted to be buried next to the big magnolia at the eastern fence line. They'd paid a premium for it. When Dale arrived at F29 that morning in July, both plots had settled. Both. He stood there for a long moment, doing the math in his head. Drainage wouldn't do that. It's not symmetrically. Not on both sides of a plot boundary. He went back to the maintenance shed and pulled the original soil compaction. Records for that section, documents from when Hargrove had been graded and laid out in 1989, he compared them against the current measurements. Then he went back to Section D and measured D112 again. Then Section B. What he found, when he laid all the measurements out on paper, was that in every case, the settled plots had compacted to a depth consistent with a burial, a standard adult burial. The settlement pattern, the way the earth had compressed, the way the surface had dished inward, just slightly matched what Dale had seen hundreds of times after a legitimate interment. Something was buried there, in at least 3 separate locations. In plots that had never, according to any record he could find, been used. He didn't go to his manager right away. He thought about it for 2 days. He knew what the manager would say. Drainage, subsidence, old fill material. He knew how it would sound if he said what he was actually thinking. So instead, on a Saturday morning when the cemetery was quiet, Dale borrowed the ground-penetrating radar unit that Hargrove kept on hand for locating old unmarked graves in the historical sections. It was a clunky piece of equipment, more suited to archaeological work than everyday use, but Dale had been trained on it years ago and knew how to read the returns. He ran it over D112 first. The image came back clear. At a depth of approximately 3 feet 8 inches, the radar showed a dense, elongated anomaly, roughly 6 feet long. 18 inches wide, the shape was unmistakable to anyone who'd spent a career in this business. It was the profile of a human body. Dale stood there in the morning sun, in a cemetery he'd worked for 11 years, and looked at that radar screen for a very long time. Then he ran the unit over D113, the adjacent plot, the right-hand side, the one that had shown no settlement, the one that looked completely undisturbed. That one came back empty. He understood what he was looking at then. Whoever, or whatever, was occupying these double plots was using only one space, one side, leaving the other half vacant, waiting. Dale did go to his manager eventually. The manager called in an outside firm to verify the radar results. The firm confirmed the anomalies in all 3 plots. The county was notified. Discrete excavations were conducted over the following month. Dale wasn't present for the excavations. His manager told him it was a liability issue, that workers shouldn't be involved, that he should take a few days of paid leave while the process played out. He did. He went home, watched television, couldn't sleep. When he came back to work, the 3 affected plots had been quietly replaced in the sales inventory. The Calloway family was told there had been a drainage issue with their chosen location and was offered a free upgrade to a premium section. The Hennings were given a similar story. The Whitfields, the couple who loved the magnolia, were told the same. Nobody told any of them what had actually been found in their plots. and nobody told Dale what those excavations had turned up. Not officially, not in writing, not ever. But he had a friend in the county records office. 3 weeks after the excavations, his friend called him and said, very quietly, that the remains found in those plots didn't match any missing person in the state database. That the remains were described in the official report as inconsistent with standard biological decomposition. That the medical examiner who'd been brought in had requested 2 additional consultations and had ultimately declined to assign cause of death. Dale said that when he went back to work, he started paying attention in a way he hadn't before. He started mapping the settled plots, section by section, row by row. He found 11 more. He posted about it in the group because he didn't know what else to do, because his manager had stopped returning his calls, because he'd tried to go back to the 3 excavation sites and found them freshly seeded, perfectly smooth, with new plot markers installed, new family names he didn't recognize, new sale dates. He said the thing that kept him up at night wasn't what was in those graves. It was the pattern. One occupied, one empty. Over and over. Waiting. He said he kept thinking about all the couples who'd purchased those double plots, who came by on weekday afternoons to walk the grounds and pick a nice spot, who fully intended to use both spaces eventually. Said he started wondering if whoever was in those graves already knew that. That was the last thing Dale wrote before his account disappeared. I've tried to find him. His name appears in Kentucky cemetery licensing records as a registered maintenance technician through 2019. After that, nothing. The Hargrove Memorial website still lists its double plots as available for pre-need purchase. If that story got under your skin a little good, it's what it's supposed to do. If you're new here, this is what we do on this channel. If you want more of it, please subscribe and leave a like. It helps more than you know. We're just getting started. Story 2 is coming right now. Story 2, The Rising Stones. Most people don't realize how much work goes into keeping a cemetery looking the way a cemetery looks. Headstones don't just stand there on their own indefinitely. Over decades, frost heave and soil movement cause them to lean, sink, and topple. A well-maintained cemetery has a dedicated maintenance schedule for what's called stone resetting, digging out the base, relaying the footing, replumbing the stone upright. It's unglamorous, physical, constant work. At St. Augustine's Cemetery in Delwood, New York, a small town about 60 miles north of Albany, the primary stone reset technician for nearly 22 years was a woman named Miriam Holt. Miriam retired in 2021 at the age of 67. She left behind, in the tool shed on the grounds, a series of maintenance notebooks that she'd kept throughout her tenure, handwritten, dated, meticulous. Her daughter Lynn found the notebooks while helping clean out the shed after the transition to new management. Lynn scanned several pages and posted them to Reddit in a thread titled, "Found my mom's old cemetery work journal." Some entries are really weird. Anyone know what this means? The thread got some traction in paranormal communities and then went quiet. I found the archived thread and reached out to Lynn directly. She shared the full scans with me. With her permission, I'm reading from Miriam's notebook tonight. I want to note, Miriam was not a dramatic person. Her notebooks are almost entirely practical. Stone reference numbers, weather conditions, soil readings, supply orders. Most of it reads like a ship's log, clipped, factual, impersonal, which makes the entries that stand out all the more. The first unusual entry appears in Miriam's notebook from October 2009 in a section labeled simply Northern Row Heave Check. The entry reads, "Inspected stones N14 through N31 per fall protocol. Found N22 and N23 elevated above grade. Measurement shows 2.1 centimeters emergent since spring. Ground too firm for standard frost heave explanation. No freeze-thaw cycle yet this season. Flagged for follow-up. A stone emerging above grade means it's rising out of the ground rather than sinking into it. Frost heave can cause this in spring. The soil freezes below the footing, expands, and pushes the stone up. But Miriam's note is clear. It was October. The ground was still firm. No freeze-thaw cycle had occurred yet. The stone had no business rising. Her follow-up entry comes 2 weeks later. Return to N22 and N23 elevation gain continues. N22 now 4.8 centimeters above original grade. N23 at 3.1 centimeters. Stone base is intact. No root intrusion, no evidence of subsurface water. Photographed for records. It's unclear mechanism. She flagged it with her manager. He came out, looked at the stones, and told her it was probably a long-delayed heave from a wet previous winter. He told her to reset them after Thanksgiving when the ground softened. She reset them. She repoured the concrete footing. She replumbed both stones. By Christmas, they were elevated again, both of them. By the same amount as before, as if the reset had never happened. Miriam's entry for December 28, 2009, N22 and N23 re-elevated following November reset, cannot explain. Asked the manager not to be reassigned from this section until I understand what's happening. Her request was granted. Not because anyone believed there was something genuinely wrong, but because she was good at her job and nobody wanted to argue with her. Watched those 2 stones for 3 years. During that time, documented a total rise of 11.4 centimeters in N22 and 9 centimeters in N23. Not continuous. There were months of no movement, then sudden jumps of 2 or 3 centimeters over a matter of weeks. She reset them 6 times. The resets held for a few months, and then reversed. She also noticed something she didn't put in the official log, but wrote in the personal section at the back of the notebook under the heading Private Observations. The rise correlates with visitor activity. The weeks of greatest elevation gain are the weeks after a funeral in the adjacent section, Section M, the new burials. I've tracked it across 12 interments. Every time someone new is buried in Section M, N22, and N23 rise. I cannot determine if this is coincidence. She also wrote something that I've read several times since Lynn shared this with me, trying to figure out how to take it. I looked up who is buried in N22. It's a man named Harold Prest, died 1961. N23 is his wife. Dorothy died 1978. They were neighbors of the Reardon family, who were buried in Section M. I know this because 3 Reardons have been buried in Section M since I began tracking the rises. Each time Harold and Dorothy's stones go up. I know this sounds like I'm reaching. I'm writing it down anyway because I don't know who else to tell. The implication in Miriam's note, the one she was very carefully not stating directly, is that something in those graves was responding to the arrivals. That Harold and Dorothy Prest were, in some form she couldn't name or explain, lifting themselves up to see. I want to be fair to Miriam. She never wrote that. She wrote what she observed. The correlation, the dates, the centimeters. She was a scientist about it in her way, a woman with calloused hands and a soil probe and a tape measure, writing down what she saw. There are 16 years of notebooks. The final entry from her last week of work in the fall of 2021 is brief. Last day. I'm leaving the notebooks here in case someone else needs them. The end stones are at 22.7 centimeters elevation above original grade. I reset them one more time this morning. It won't hold. I'm sorry I never figured it out. I hope the new person is paying attention. Lynn told me that the new groundskeeper. She asked him about sections N22 and N23 after finding the notebooks. Told her he'd noticed the stones were sitting high and had been meaning to reset them. She said she didn't tell him why they kept coming back up. She said she didn't think it would help. Take a breath. We've got 4 more stories tonight, and they go deeper. If you're watching this on YouTube and you haven't subscribed yet, do that now. There's a button right there. It costs you nothing, and it means everything to this channel. Like the video too, if you're enjoying the series. I put real time into tracking these stories down, and every like tells me it's worth it. Story 3. We're going to Ohio. Story 3. Section G. There is a federal regulation, Title 38 U.S. Code, that governs the burial of unidentified and indigent individuals in the United States. Most people are not aware of it. Most people have no reason to be. But what it means in practice is that every county in America has a designated place to bury the unclaimed. The people who die in hospitals with no family, the unidentified, the forgotten. Every county has a field for them. At Whitmore County Municipal Cemetery in central Ohio, that field is called Section G. It occupies the northeast corner of the grounds. Separated from the rest of the cemetery by a low stone wall and a stand of overgrown boxwood that nobody trims particularly carefully. The graves in Section G are marked with flat concrete tablets, no names, just numbers. The numbers correspond to county case files. Most of the case files are sealed. For 12 years, from roughly 2005 to 2017, not a single groundskeeper at Whitmore County would enter Section G after dark. This is according to Tomas Reyes, who worked at Whitmore County Municipal from 2005 through 2017. First as a general laborer, and eventually as the senior groundskeeper. He told his story on a true crime podcast called Unmarked, which ran an episode on Section G in 2022. The episode was pulled from all platforms within 48 hours of release. A transcript was saved and posted to a horror community Discord server called The Vault. I found it there, and I've since verified several details of the account through county records. This is what Tomas told the podcast host. Tomas Reyes was 24 years old when he started at Whitmore County. He'd grown up in the area, knew the cemetery the way most locals did, vaguely, from a distance. He'd driven past it hundreds of times. He took the job because it was steady, paid decently, and he didn't mind working outdoors. His supervisor, on his first day, a man named Gerald Huff, who had worked at Whitmore for nearly 30 years, walked him around the grounds section by section. When they reached the stone wall bordering Section G, Gerald stopped walking. "We don't go in there after 5, Gerald said. Tomas asked why. Gerald was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The numbers on those tablets, they change." Tomas laughed. Thought Gerald was messing with the new guy. Gerald didn't laugh. "I know how it sounds," Gerald said. "I know exactly how it sounds. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you not to go in there after 5 o'clock. That's all." Tomas, being 24 and reasonable, did not fully comply with this instruction. He was curious, the way young people are curious about exactly the things they're warned away from. He didn't go in after dark right away, but about 6 weeks into the job. On an October afternoon, when he'd stayed late to finish a project and the sun had gone down faster than he expected, he found himself raking leaves in the far corner of the cemetery close to Section G, and he decided to take a look. He climbed over the low stone wall and walked the row nearest the entrance. The flat concrete tablets stood at steady intervals, set flush with the ground, each one bearing a number. Section G was organized simply, G1 through G whatever, in loose rows from west to east. Tomas walked the first row casually, not looking for anything in particular, just satisfying his curiosity. He stopped at G14. The tablet read G14, which was what it should read. But something about it caught him. He crouched down and looked more closely. The numerals on the tablets were cast into the concrete when the slabs were poured. They weren't painted on, weren't stamped onto a metal plate. They were part of the stone, permanent. Except on G14, the numbers looked different. Not different in a way he could immediately articulate, just different. Like the surface of the stone around them had a slightly different texture, like the numbers had been there for a different length of time than the stone itself. He went back the next day in daylight and looked again. Couldn't see what had bothered him about G14 in the daylight. The tablet looked completely normal. He asked Gerald about it. He described what he'd seen or thought he'd seen the previous evening. Gerald listened carefully. Then he said, "What number was it?" Tomas said 14. Gerald nodded slowly. He went to the main office and came back with a battered 3-ring binder that turned out to be an informal ledger, handwritten, that previous groundskeepers had apparently been keeping for decades. Opened it to a section near the back and showed Tomas a column of numbers. The column was headed Changed. The numbers in the column were tablet numbers from Section G. There were 31 entries. G214 was on the list. Gerald explained, as calmly as he could. Tomas said, as if he'd accepted this as a simple fact of his working life, that the ground crews had been observing the number changes since at least the 1980s. That certain tablets in Section G periodically displayed different numbers than they should. That the numbers they changed to did not correspond to any case on file with the county, which Tomas understood meant that whatever those tablets were marking, had not been officially placed there. Gerald said the working theory among the crew was that Section G had been used informally before the county took it over in 1971, that there were graves there that predated the county's record-keeping, that whoever was buried in those unofficial slots had somehow found ways to mark themselves. Tomas asked, "Mark themselves with what? Concrete numbers?" Gerald said, "I don't know how. I just know they do." Tomas worked at Whitmore County for 12 years. In that time, he personally documented 9 number changes. In every case, the changed tablet was in a row of otherwise normal tablets. In every case, the new number bore no relation to the county registry. In 2 cases, the number was not in any format used by the cemetery at all. Not sequential, not in the county's assigned range, just a number that shouldn't have been there. In 2015, Tomas and 2 colleagues submitted a formal request to the county to excavate 3 of the anomalous sites to determine whether unofficial remains were present.
Ow.
The county declined. The request was logged as maintenance concern resolved, which it was not. When Tomas left the job in 2017, he took his personal notes with him. He kept the ledger, too. Gerald, who retired in 2013, had told him to take it when he left.
Oh.
"Don't leave it there," Gerald had said. "They'd like it when someone's paying attention to them." Tomas told the podcast host that what bothered him most, even more than the changes themselves, was the regularity of them. They didn't happen constantly. They weren't chaotic. They happened, as best he could reconstruct, in a pattern in years when Section G received a new numbered burial. As if the additions woke something up. As if the older occupants, the unrecorded ones, were responding to the company. They were still there, so they just wanted their numbers to be right. I need a moment after that one, and I imagine you might too. If this series is doing what good horror stories are supposed to do, if it's making you think, it's making you uncomfortable, making you wonder about the cemeteries you drive past every single day, then it's working. Subscribe if you haven't. Leave a like. Come back for the next one. We're halfway through. Story 4 is about something older than numbers in stone. Story 4. The Mourner. The image of the weeping woman appears in the mythology and folklore of nearly every culture on Earth. In Mexico, she is La Llorona, the wailing woman who haunts riverbanks and crossroads, mourning the children she lost. In Irish and Scottish tradition, she is the banshee whose keening cry foretells a death in the family. In Filipino folklore, she is the Manananggal. In Malaysian legend, the Pontianak. Across traditions that never touched each other, across oceans and centuries, the same figure keeps appearing. A woman in grief, near death, making a sound that means someone is going to die. Ray Elkins had heard of none of these traditions. He was a practical man, a groundskeeper and night security officer at Green Hills Memorial Cemetery in Tipton County, Tennessee, and by his own description, not the kind of person who put stock in ghost stories or folklore. He'd worked night shifts at Green Hills for 8 years without incident. Ray submitted his account to a YouTube channel called Night Watch Stories in March 2020 via email. He included several photographs, which the channel owner described as blurry but not nothing, before the channel owner could post the story. The original email was flagged and removed by an automated system for reasons that have never been satisfactorily explained to the channel owner, who forwarded the text from memory to a horror writing community before he forgot the details. That forwarded version eventually found its way to me. This is what Ray Elkins wrote. It started on a Thursday evening in November 2018. Ray was doing his first round of the night. which he usually started around 9 p.m. checking the gates, checking the maintenance shed locks, walking the perimeter, standard stuff. Green Hills was a medium-sized cemetery, a little over 40 acres, with a central chapel and 3 main sections. Section 1 was the oldest, dating to the 1880s. Section 3 was the newest, the past 20 years of burials. Ray usually walked in order. Section 3, Section 2, Section 1, perimeter, chapel, shed, back to the office. He could do the whole circuit in about 45 minutes in good weather. That Thursday, he was near the end of his round in the older section, Section 1, near the back fence, when he heard it. He described it as crying, a woman crying. Not distant or ambient, but close, 20 or 30 feet away, somewhere among the older stones. His immediate assumption was that someone had gotten locked in when the gates closed at dusk. It happened a few times a year. Visitors who'd lost track of time, usually harmless. He called out. No response. He turned on his flashlight and walked in the direction of the sound. He found no one. Walked the full Section 1 grid. Nothing. The crying had stopped. Finished his round and noted it in his log as possible trespasser not located. The second night, same thing. Same section. Same area of the section near a cluster of older stones in the northeast corner. Was more prepared this time. Moved faster toward the sound. Again, nobody there. The third night, the crying was louder. He was certain it was human. He was certain it was female. Noted that it didn't sound like distress. Not panicked crying. Not crying for help. It sounded like grief. Deep, private, inconsolable grief. The kind of sound you don't make when you think anyone is listening. On the fourth night, he brought a second flashlight and a radio, and asked his colleague Marcus to do the Section 1 sweep while he circled the perimeter. They communicated by radio. At approximately 10:20 p.m., Marcus's voice came over the radio. Ray, I hear it. Ray asked where. Northeast corner, near the Hartley Stones. Ray ran. He came around the eastern fence line at a full jog and entered Section 1 from the back. He could see Marcus's flashlight ahead of him, aimed at the northeast corner. He could hear the crying clearly now. Both men heard it at the same moment, converging from opposite sides of the section. And then both men stopped. There was a woman standing at the Hartley Stones. She was dressed in dark clothing. Both Ray and Marcus described it as dark, though they disagreed on whether it was black or deep gray or dark blue. She was facing away from them, facing the stones, with her hands at her sides. She was crying. Sound was unmistakable. Ray called out. She didn't turn. He moved forward. She was there. She was solid. She cast a shadow in the flashlight beam. He got to within 10 feet of her. And then he wrote, she just wasn't there anymore. Not vanished in a dramatic way. Not a puff of smoke or a flash of light. She was there, and then she wasn't. Between one step and the next. Both men stood in the northeast corner of Section 1 and said nothing for what Ray described as a very long time. Ray looked at the Hartley Stones. There were 3 of them, a family cluster from the 1890s, a husband and wife and a daughter. The daughter's stone, a small one, read, Agnes Hartley, 1891 to 1912. Taken from us too soon. Ray went back to the office. He did some searching and found what he was looking for in a county archive. A brief newspaper item from 1912 about the death of Agnes Hartley. Age 21, from what the paper called a brief illness, the item mentioned. That Agnes had recently become engaged to a man from a neighboring county. The man's name was in the clipping. Ray found his grave in Section 2. Thomas Aldred, 1889 to 1918. Died 6 years after Agnes. Ray wrote, I'm not saying I know who she was. I'm saying that when I stood there in November in that corner of Section 1, I heard something that sounded exactly like someone who had been waiting a very long time and couldn't stop. Over the following 3 weeks, the crying was heard 4 more times. Always Thursday evenings. Always the same area. Always stopping when someone approached. On the last Thursday, It was heard December 13th, 2018. There was a fresh funeral in Section 2. A woman, elderly, buried that afternoon. Ray checked the name and the burial records against the Hartley family plot. There was no connection he could find, but the crying was never heard again after that night. Ray wrote, "Maybe she found who she was looking for. Maybe whatever she was waiting on finally came. I don't know. I don't have an explanation. I just know the cemetery's been quiet on Thursday night since December, and I know what I heard. I know what Marcus heard. I know we both saw her standing there. I've thought about that story a lot since I found it. It's about Agnes Hartley at 21, and the man she was supposed to marry, and the 6 years between them. About whatever it is that survives in certain places, tied to certain stones. We've got 2 more tonight. Story 5 comes at this from a different angle. Not someone who watches the dead, but someone who found evidence that the dead had been busy while no one was watching. Subscribe and like if you're still with me. We're almost there. Story 5. The Fresh Grave. Under normal circumstances, digging a grave requires a minimum of 3 separate documents: a burial permit issued by the state, a work order issued by the cemetery, and a transit permit if the remains are coming from another jurisdiction. This is not bureaucratic excess. It's a chain of accountability. It ensures that every grave is traceable, that every burial is documented, that nothing ends up in the ground that can't be verified and identified. These documents exist for reasons that become obvious the moment you think about what would happen without them. At Calvary Ridge Cemetery in Broadwater County, Montana, caretaker and groundskeeper, Pete Sorensen arrived on a Monday morning in October 2016 to find that someone had dug a grave during the weekend. Section C, Row 11. The space designated C1128. Dug by hand, Pete could tell that much from the tool marks in the walls of the excavation. Dug to the correct depth, 4 feet 8 inches at Calvary Ridge's standard. Dug with obvious skill. No permit, no work order, no transit document, nothing on file with the county. And when Pete looked into the grave, it was occupied. This story was posted to a now-defunct paranormal investigation website called graveseekers.net in October 2016 and was archived by the Wayback Machine before the site went down in 2018. The username was Pete_S_Montana. The post received 847 replies. The original poster responded to none of them. I've verified through Broadwater County Public Records that a burial irregularity investigation was opened in October 2016 and closed 3 months later with the notation matter resolved. No further details are publicly available. Pete Sorensen had worked at Calvary Ridge for 7 years. It was a small cemetery, fewer than 2,000 plots, serving a rural community with Pete as the only full-time employee. He had a part-time helper on Fridays for mowing, but during the week the place was essentially his. He arrived that Monday at 7 a.m. and went through his usual opening routine, unlocked the equipment shed, walked the grounds, checked for vandalism or storm damage. It was a routine he'd done so many times it was practically unconscious. He knew the grounds well enough that anything out of place registered immediately. Section C was in the back of the cemetery, a newer section, not yet half full. Pete walked it as part of his perimeter check and stopped when he reached row 11. The grave was there. He stood at the edge of it for a moment, confused in a practical way before he was confused in any other way. His first thought was scheduling error. He had no interment scheduled for that Monday. He was certain of that, but perhaps something had come through over the weekend that he hadn't been notified about. Perhaps the funeral home had gotten permission through the main office, and he hadn't received the paperwork yet. It happened rarely. He called the office. The weekend answering service had no record of an authorized burial. He called the county registrar's emergency line. No burial permit had been issued for Calvary Ridge that weekend. He called the funeral home they worked with most frequently. No knowledge of any Monday interment at Calvary Ridge. That was when he looked into the grave. What he saw, he described in his post as someone in a burial shroud, a white cloth, bound tightly in the shape of a person. The shroud was not new, it was stained and aged, and he could not tell how old it was. The figure inside was approximately adult size. He could not determine gender. He did not attempt to unwrap or disturb the shroud. He called the county sheriff's department. The deputy who responded treated it initially as a straightforward case, an illegal burial. It's probably a family member trying to spare themselves the cost of a funeral, not unheard of in rural counties. He called for the county medical examiner and began the standard process. Pete waited in the parking lot. He didn't want to watch. The medical examiner arrived about 2 hours later. Pete heard them working. He heard the deputy on his radio. After about 45 minutes, the deputy came to find Pete in the parking lot and asked him to come back to the site. The medical examiner was standing at the edge of the grave, which had been partially excavated further. She was not writing anything. She was just standing there. The deputy asked Pete to confirm that this was not a section with any existing burials, that C-1108 had no prior interment history. Pete confirmed it. He had the plot registry in his truck. He pulled it out and showed them. C-1108 was empty. Had been empty since the section was laid out in 2008, the medical examiner said, looking up from the grave. How many years did you say this section has been open? Pete said 8. She said, these remains are significantly older than 8 years. She said it calmly, in the tone of someone who was choosing her words carefully. Pete asked her what she meant by significantly older. She said she'd need laboratory analysis to be more precise. But her preliminary assessment was that the remains in C-1108 has been in the ground for decades at minimum, possibly much longer. The grave had been dug recently. The soil was fresh, the walls were clean, the depth was standard. But whoever was buried in it had been dead for a very long time before being placed there. Pete wrote, I kept thinking about the shovel marks on the walls. Someone had dug that grave by hand. A fresh grave, perfectly dug by hand, over a weekend when the cemetery was locked and the security camera at the main gate showed no one entering. They'd put something very old into it, very carefully, and then they'd left. The investigation concluded 3 months later. The official resolution, as Pete understood it from a conversation with the deputy, was that the remains had been disinterred from an unknown location and reburied. The source location was never identified. The identity of the remains was never established. No suspect was ever named in connection with the illegal burial. Pete wrote, I've thought about this every day since it happened. Someone moved those remains. Someone decided they needed to be somewhere specific, chose that spot, dug that grave to the right depth, the right dimensions, in a section of a cemetery they somehow knew well enough to navigate by hand in the dark. Then they covered it up and left like they'd done everything exactly right. He wrote, the thing I can't let go of is this. The grave was in C-1108. The adjacent plot, C-11-9, had been sold. Pre-need. The buyer was a man in his 70s who'd purchased it for himself the year before. He's still living. He wrote, I don't know what to do with that. The post ends there. 847 replies. Not one response from Pete_S_Montana. One more. Last one of the night. And I want to warn you, this one ties some threads together. Pay attention. If you've made it this far, you're the kind of listener this channel exists for. Subscribe if you haven't. Like the video. It genuinely helps me keep doing this. One more story. The Last Caretaker. Story 6. The Last Caretaker. Ashwood Cemetery sits at the end of a 2-lane road in Craftsbury, Vermont, a town of fewer than 1,000 people near the Canadian border, where winters come early and stay late. Ashwood is the oldest privately operated cemetery in New England. The earliest legible burial marker dates to 1697. There are sections of the grounds, particularly toward the back wall, where the stones are too weathered to read at all, where you are walking among names that the earth has already swallowed. For 61 years, Ashwood Cemetery was maintained by one man, a caretaker named Edmund Farr, who took the position in 1960 at the age of 32 and held it until his death in December 2021 at the age of 93. Edmund lived in a cottage on the grounds. He had no family. When he died, found by a Craftsbury selectman who hadn't seen smoke from the cottage chimney for 3 days, there was no estate to speak of. His belongings were boxed and donated to the Vermont Historical Society. Inside one of those boxes, a volunteer named Claire Bouchard found a voice recorder. The recorder contained 22 audio files. She also found a spiral notebook and a sealed envelope addressed in Edmund's handwriting, too. Whoever finds this first. Claire transcribed the notebook and listened to all 22 recordings. She shared what she found anonymously on a historical horror writing forum before resigning from the Historical Society the following spring. She has not been publicly active since. This is the last story in our Cemetery Caretaker series. I've been building toward it all night. The sealed letter was short. Claire described it as businesslike, almost formal, written in the careful script of someone who had learned to write in a different era. She transcribed it exactly. He read, "To the person holding this letter, I have worked at Ashwood for 61 years. I have kept good records of the grounds and of everything that has occurred here. The notebook contains those records. The recordings are supplementary. Please do not discard them without reading and listening. There are things at Ashwood that the next caretaker will need to know. I am sorry I waited so long to write this down. I kept thinking there would be more time. It always seems like there will be more time. E. Farr." The notebook was a working log, like Miriam Holt's. Years of maintenance records, section surveys, equipment notes. But woven throughout, in a different ink than the technical entries, were personal observations. Claire said they appeared irregularly, sometimes years apart, and then in clusters. The observations were never framed as supernatural. They were framed as anomalies requiring explanation. The first personal entry was from 1974. Edmund had been at Ashwood for 14 years. He wrote, "Someone has been tending the graves in Section A, the oldest section. PRE 1800, in ways I cannot account for. Stones have been righted that I did not write. Sod has been replaced around footings I haven't touched. Not my work. I have set up a simple perimeter string around the section and will check it each morning. The perimeter string," he noted 5 days later, "was undisturbed each morning. No one had crossed it. The work in Section A continued anyway." He concluded, "Whatever is maintaining those stones does not need to cross the perimeter string." He did not seem frightened by this conclusion. He seemed, reading his notebooks, to be simply taking note of a fact. The next cluster of personal entries came in the mid-1980s. By this point, Edmund had abandoned the idea of explaining the maintenance anomalies and had simply begun cataloging them. Which sections were showing overnight work, which stones were being tended, whether the work was consistent with standard cemetery maintenance or showed unfamiliar techniques. One entry from 1987 reads, "The graves in Section A are being maintained to a standard I could not match myself. The joints between the stone bases and the ground are perfect. No settlement gap, no frost damage, no moss intrusion. I have been doing this work for 27 years and I cannot achieve that result. Whatever is working in Section A is better at this than I am." He wrote it without ego and without obvious fear. Professional assessment. The voice recordings began in 2008. Edmund apparently acquired the recorder from somewhere and used it for what he called observations that don't translate well to paper. Claire said most of the recordings were technical, notes about trees, drainage, equipment. But the last 6 recordings, all from the final months of 2021, in the last year of his life, were different. I'm going to describe them, not transcribe them, because Claire said Edmund's voice in those last recordings was difficult to listen to, not because of what he said, but because of how old he sounded. He was 93 years old, and he was sitting in a cottage in Vermont in the winter. Alone, talking into a recorder, and Claire said you could hear the cold in his voice. In the first of the final recordings, Edmund said he had begun noticing that the nighttime maintenance work, which had been confined to Section A for decades, had expanded. It was now occurring in every section of the cemetery, every night. He said the quality of the work was the same as it had always been, exceptional, beyond his own capabilities. He said he was no longer alarmed by it. He said, "I think they've always done it. I think I only noticed the old section because that's where I paid the most attention. I think this has been happening the whole time I've been here." In the second recording, he talked about footprints. He had found them in the mud near the southern wall, in a section of the grounds that flooded slightly during autumn rains. He said they were human footprints, 2 feet adult-sized, walking in a deliberate pattern consistent with someone doing a maintenance check, walking the rows, stopping at certain stones. Moving on, said the footprints stopped at the edge of the mud each time, as if whatever made them knew where the soft ground ended and crossed no further. In the fourth recording, he said something I've thought about since the first time I heard Claire's transcription. He said, "I've spent 61 years thinking of myself as the caretaker of Ashwood. I think that was never quite right. I think the correct word is that I have been the visible caretaker. It's the one who accepts deliveries and files permits and talks to families and operates the equipment. I think the actual caretaking, the real work, the deep work, the work that keeps a place like this in the condition it's in, has been done by others, and by those who have more time than I do, by those who are not going anywhere. I am the one who shows up in daylight. They are the ones who stay." The last recording was made, according to the recorder's timestamp, on the evening of December 4th, 2021. Edmund Farr died sometime between December 4th and December 7th. When the selectmen came to check on him, in the last recording, Edmund's voice is quieter than in the others. He says, "I'm leaving a note for whoever comes next. I want them to know the grounds are being looked after. I want them to know they are not doing this alone, even when they think they are, even in the worst of the winter nights. I want them to know that the ones who are here, they know the work, understand what this place is for. I was never afraid of them, not once in 61 years. I hope whoever comes next feels the same way." He pauses for a long moment after that, and then he says one more thing, very quietly, almost to himself. "I think some of them are glad I'm coming." The recorder clicks off. When the selectmen found Edmund 3 days later, the cottage was cold. The fire had long gone out. But the grounds of Ashwood Cemetery, every section, every stone, every path, were clean. There was no recent windfall, no leaf litter, no frost damage, nothing out of place. The grounds were immaculate, as if someone had just finished. That's the last story. That's all 6. I'm going to sit with that one for a while. I hope you will too. Here's what I believe. Having spent months with these stories, the people who tend our cemeteries see things the rest of us don't. They move through those spaces every day, in all weather, at all hours, with their hands in the soil and their eyes on the stones. And occasionally, not always, not often, but occasionally something looks back. If you made it through all 6 of these tonight, thank you. I mean that sincerely. This is not easy content to spend time with, and you've stayed with it. That means something. If this is your first time on the channel and you liked what you heard, please subscribe. The button is right there, one tap, and it tells me to keep going. I like the video. If these stories did their job, share it with whoever in your life appreciates a story that feels real, because those people deserve to know this channel exists. I'll be back soon with more. We've got more accounts, more places, more people who kept quiet for too long and then finally decided to tell someone what they'd seen. Rest well.